there's
table there.
Oh, yeah. Pick a card, any card. No, there's nothing up my sleeve. Under my jacket.
Sorry, guys.
All right, so last week we talked about where we get distorted views of God, right? So if you missed that, make sure you go back, check out the recording. But we talked about relationships early in life. We talked about uncritically reflecting on life. We talked about the fact that we are advertised to relentlessly, and every advertisement is there to make you feel like you are less so that you will want to buy some more, right? So that's kind of what we're going to start as the foundation of for rebuilding our foundation. So, do you know, and Bob's not allowed to answer, did you know there's a pretty lucrative industry? This is not mine, by the way. I borrowed it from someone in the room. I'll give it right back to him. There's a pretty lucrative industry of taking these pieces of paper and making more of them that look like this. You're aware, right? Yes, yes. So there are people who are trained to take these things and know when one of them that looks mostly like this is real or fake. So, do you know how the government trains their FBI agents on how to spot counterfeit bills?
Yes.
No, you
Counterfeit bills.
to what?
To make them themselves.
They have to make them themselves?
They go with the real one.
They
The
have
real
to
one,
have
before
those.
they look at counterfeits, they gotta know what the real ones are.
Okay, so where's my screen marker here?
How do they train the FBI agents?
So the way that they do this, you'd think, okay, there's trends in these. Like, I was in a role that led to some of this, like where I would possibly come across these type things. And there's waves, there's trends. People find new technology and therefore they're able to spot something. And so then there's this new ink or, a new printer that's available on the market. And all of a sudden people are able to make more and more and more convincing forgeries. So the answer to it, though, you guys kind of got onto already, is that the government agents aren't necessarily as much trained on the counterfeits. They are some, but they tell their agents to spend as much time as they can dealing with the real thing. Know how it feels when it's in your hand. Know what it looks like when the light reflects off of it, the paper quality, the fibers that you can see if you hold it up to the light, the little security features, like if you go right here, I can see Ben Franklin's face in this invisible spot, but then if I'm right here, I can't see it, right? There's security strips in some. There's specific elements of printing to them. Come on in, Ron. There's your serial numbers. There's the weight of the paper. There's the weight of the portrait. So they spend countless hours studying the real thing so that when a forgery comes across, they're able to take a look at it and go, something about this doesn't feel right. Right?
I think
Okay.
that one looks kind of suspect.
This one,
That's
oh,
what
I
was
better
thinking, too.
keep it there. Kathy, you're safe. So, in the same way, we're going to talk about these distortions that we have of God. And last week I asked the question, how many feel, or at least in the small group, how many feel like they have at least some level of a distortion in their view of God? And everybody was honest enough to say, yeah, there's probably some things there. We talked about how we got them. Now we're going to start talking about specifically what some of them are. But we're going to kind of alternate. We're going to spend some time on the forgery, just so that you're aware it's there. Like, even though, the agents are trained to sit there and study the main thing, they also get updates like, hey, there's been this new printer released. It does this really well, so make sure you're aware of this. Or, there's some things over there. So we will spend a little bit of time talking about the forgeries, so to speak. But what we're going to spend a greater amount of time in this talking about is the real thing. What does the Bible say about God? What does history and the movement of history say about the nature and character of God? So that's where we're going to spend a little bit more of our time. But just a reminder on these foundations. Oh, look at there. The more intimately familiar you are with the original, the easier it is to spot the forgeries. So as we start to get to know what God does across history, then when you start to have conversations, someone says, oh, I hate God. He's the one who, and we mentioned last week the idea of cancer in babies. We mentioned, somebody says, oh yeah, God caused me to have a bad week. I'm like, oh, okay, well, talk to me about that. What did God do? Well, God caused me to get in a car accident, or okay. Well, first you want to just be there for someone. You just want to hear them out, right? But at some point you go, but wait, if we're uncritically reflecting on life and I just let you sit in there and say, oh, God's beating me up constantly, you're creating a distorted version of God for yourself in your mind as well. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on that. But I want to talk about why this is important. It comes back to the lenses conversation. So this last year, I stopped wearing lenses, went to contacts for a while, so I couldn't do this. But right now I'm back on lenses, so it's a nice illustration. But if you hold up my glasses to the light, you'll see there's all these specks and spots. I've cleaned them on my shirt. You're not supposed to do that, by the way. My optometrist gets mad at me for that. Oh, look, I just smudged it worse. That's probably why. But if I look through these, and there's this big distorted smudge right here that I just made, when I look through these glasses, it shapes what I see. It's scary how poorly right now I can see all of you, and then I do this and things come into focus. If the color of these glasses are red, everything I see turns red. If they're dirty or mucky, everything I see is dirty, distorted. If they're dark, like I have some sunglasses in my car, then everything around me looks dark. So the lens that you have shapes the way you see and interact with the entire world. I promise you, if I walk around like this too much, I'm going to be interacting with the world differently, because while I can see you guys okay, it's a little scary to me how fuzzy all of you are until I do that, right? So let's talk about that, because the lens, we've talked about foundations. We also kind of mentioned our view of God as a lens. The things we believe about God form a lens that we then see the rest of the world through. And the reality is, as we talked about last week, the more distorted, the more broken, the more counterfeit our lens is, it starts to shape us into a certain type of person. Because if God is the answer to the ultimate question, all of those other questions start to fall into that as well. So what happens is, the more we hold to a certain view of God, the more that begins to shape us as a person. Here's where this really means it. As we're shaped by our view of God, we start to act like, and start to think like, and start to react and interact with others more and more like that view that we have of God. So somebody said recently, with these events that are going on, they said, how do we stand up to the injustices that we're seeing in the world right now? And I'm not telling you that protests or peaceful, at least, things like that are not going to make a difference. They certainly can. But what truly makes a difference is when you help someone see through a different lens of life. I used an illustration several months ago in one of my sermons, but there's this wonderful man. He's an African-American gentleman who he was sitting down in a bar one time, and he started striking up a conversation with the gentleman next to him. And partway through the conversation, the gentleman next to him said, "This is really interesting for me." He said, "Why is that?" He goes, "I've never had a conversation with a black man before." And the guy went, "We live in the South. How could that possibly be?" And the guy goes, "Well, I didn't want to mention this, but I'm a card-carrying member of a group that has 3 letters that they use over as their initials that most people would not associate with love, tolerance, peace, and hope, right?" And the guy said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, I've never had a conversation like this before, and it's really challenging me because you are not what I've been told. And you can just finish the rest of that sentence, right? So this man made it his life's mission to start interacting as a black man, African-American man, with members of the KKK. And as he did more and more interactions with them, more and more, he they did a big news story on him years ago, and he went to his closet and he pulled out white robes. And they're like, why in the world do you have these? He goes, well, I've befriended enough members of the Klan that once they get to know me well enough, some of them have walked away from it and they give me their robes as a, hey, look, I'm changing my ways. So what changes in a person, it can be changed in a conversation, it can be changed in a sign, in a peaceful protest, et cetera, et cetera. But what usually it takes is a shift of their worldview. When they put on a new set of glasses, all of a sudden you start to see things differently. You start to interact with people differently. And so we tend to become an image of the God that we have in our lives. And I mentioned last week, God, little g gods, doesn't matter. Everybody has an ultimate seat of authority. And whatever that is for you, you will tend to become more like that. So we need to explore the question, who is this God person anyway? One of the resources we're going to use, promise it's not to toot my own horn, anything like that, but we are going to be digging into a book I wrote a few years ago called Who is This God Person Anyway? And just to show that I'm not trying to make a buck, anything like that, it's on our website for free. So if you'd like to just download it and read it, it's right there. We'll roughly be going through, for the next about 5 weeks, we'll be going through about 2 chapters worth of material from it each time, but most of it will be through this discussion format and etc. So if you'd like to download it, it's right there. Also, the original creator of this experience was Dr. Cliff Sanders. He has 2 books, one of which is Making Sense Out of Spirituality. That is kind of the basis of what he turned into for this class. Like he took his class and turned it into a 75 to 100 page book, and then I took it and turned it into a 200 page book. So he went the opposite direction with it because he had taught it for so long. He refined it down to just the simplest concepts. So that's kind of a shorthand version. And then the Optimism of Grace is his exploration of the teachings of John Wesley in terms of grace and the Bible. So those are going to be some of the resources that most heavily shape this next section. But as I mentioned, that resource right there is available for free on the website. You can download it. You can read it. It's helpful, hopefully. Okay, so let's talk about our first distortion of the image of God. This one hits differently in my life now. God versus the cosmic cop. So a lot of people have a view of God that is based around the imagery that we associate with our interactions with police officers. Prior to this last year, I had 20 years without a speeding ticket, without being pulled over, without anything. However, when I was a teenager, just learning how to drive, I had 2 accidents back to back, and I got pulled over 4 times within the span of 6 months. And I promise you, most of them were stupid, right? I got pulled over one time. I literally was coming from where I had gotten my tags from my car. Yeah, they were expired. Don't look at that side of the story. Just hear the good side, the side that makes me look good. I literally had him on the seat next to me. Officer pulls me over. He says, "Do you know your plates are expired?" I was like, "I have them right here." Oh. Another time I noticed my headlight was out. It's the front one, the driver's side, it can be a problem. I literally went to AutoZone and was driving home to put it in. I get pulled over. I'm like, "Officer, look, here is the Sylvania headlight with the right brand and everything. I don't know how to put it in, so I had to go home to do it," right? And then I got pulled over one time because I was driving a 1977 Chevy pickup truck that my uncle had sold me for $800. Remember when you could buy a car for $800? And something in it broke underneath. And I'm not a car guy. All I know is it used to go and then all of a sudden it went pa-pow, pa-pow. And I was sitting in traffic, and apparently the officer could hear my truck over his radio, and so he pulled me over and gave me a ticket for disturbing the peace. So I'm like, oh my gosh. So all of a sudden, all of this happens in about 6 months' time. And then nothing. I had one speeding ticket when I was in Dallas, Texas, when I lived there. But that was 2003. 20 years later, nothing, right? Not a single bad interaction since. However, if I'm in traffic, and you can ask my wife this, she loves it. Whenever I'm in traffic, and all of a sudden I notice there's a cop somewhere behind me, all of a sudden I'm hyper aware of everything that's going on around me. I'm very 10 and 2, right? I'm watching my speed, because you don't want to go too fast, but you also don't want to go too slow, because if you slow down too fast, my class this last year, one of the guys in that group said, if you're speeding, but you're not going too fast, you're not doing too bad, but you stay on it, I'm like, okay, all right, that's fine. But if you drop off your speed as soon as you see me, you're like, all right, you're guilty, man. You know you did this wrong, so I'm going to get you, right? So I'm always aware of like not going too fast, not going too slow. And then like all I can think about is the fact that someone is behind me. And obviously they're watching me. Obviously they want to pull me over specifically, even though 20 years I haven't had a bad interaction. That's the cosmic cop idea. So many people have this view of God that comes from maybe our early interactions with our family, maybe media. Honestly, it kind of comes in some regards, the studies that we have of like Zeus and some of the Greek deities, where they were very just capricious, very out to get you. I have one person, I won't share who they are. They were in my life about 20 years ago as well. And they said, if I could boil my view of God down to a sentiment, it would be, I always feel like the other shoe is about to drop. So we have this idea that kind of could correlate over to Santa Claus too. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good. And if you're not good, he's going to come get you. He's going to put you in bars. He's going to punish you. He's going to take away your toys. He's going to cite you. You're going to have all this labor and work, and you're going to lose all your freedom. We laugh, but this is a very commonly held mistaken view of God. Now, I mentioned I sit on a different side of it. For those of you who don't know, I worked for the Arvada Police Department for the last year up until November, and got to see from the inside, like, oh, most of these guys are really good people. They're trying to protect. They've been hurt a couple times, so they're a little cautious, you know. They're looking. In fact, I was trained as I'm driving through traffic what vehicles to look for, and guess what? It's usually not mine. And for those who are watching, you can't use this against me, but they also have a kind of a standing policy. If you're not doing at least about 15 miles an hour over, they really have better things to do with their time than to go after you. If you're doing much more than that, oh yeah, they're going to get you. They're going to find you, kind of thing. But there's this idea that we kind of carry over to our relationship with God, and what it creates is this fear. So Dr. Cliff Sanders said, no intimacy or relationship is ever established with someone whom you fear and wish only to keep from punishing you. Think about that in how you interact with God. See, the Bible does say the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. There's just one problem. Words have lots of meanings sometimes, right? Like a famous person once said, it sucks that I use the same word to say I love my wife and I love Taco Bell. Both of those things are true, but they don't mean the same thing, right? Close. Yeah, that's right. She's holding the baby. You can still run. Yeah, I got it. Yeah. But think about this. The word fear, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A lot of times people intuit or put into or don't critically think through that phrase. And what they come away from is this idea of God as a scary, clown in the sewer that's waiting to get you, that's going, come here. Oh, I saw when you did that. You'll know if this is part of your distortions, if when you do something and then you say one of those naughty words afterwards, you immediately go, sorry, God, sorry. I don't know if you saw that or heard that, right? You have this like internal, we're going to talk about our conscience in a couple weeks, but you have this internal monologue going, oh, God saw that and he's angry at me for it, right? So the problem is, while the Bible does say the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, the word fear in that sense and in the word usage in the Hebrew and what it would have meant to the original hearers who first were told those words wasn't fear like, you better straighten up or dad's going to come home and talk to you. Some of you know those words. The fear of the Lord is this sense of awe, reverence. It is recognizing that God is so much bigger than us. He's so much more powerful than us. He could snuff us out, so to speak, like this. But knowing that God's character does not line up with an angry, vindictive, vicious parent who's waiting for you to get home to choose your own switch that they're going to then whoop you with. Knowing that God is not the cosmic cop who's just watching and just waiting so that he can go, woo, ha ha, I got you this time. I can't wait to punish you for this. But think about it. Honestly, that may well be a large influence or chunk or way that you see God. The Bible shows us a God who is different than this, however. So on page 32, you'll see this restoration of who God is. So we've kind of looked at the trends in counterfeiting out there for a second. So what we're going to do for the next roughly 25 minutes is to focus on the God who is known as Father. Dr. Sanders said, this God is consistent with the revelation of Father. So, a great theologian man named Karl Barth once said, it is not that there is first of all human fatherhood and then so-called divine fatherhood, but just the reverse. True and proper fatherhood resides in God, and from this fatherhood, what we know as fatherhood among us men is delivered. So, let's talk about Jesus for a second. One of the most revolutionary things that Jesus ever did was to walk around and tell people that they could relate to God as Father. To understand that, because we're on the other side of history and we're just so used to certain things that Jesus said and did that we don't really feel the impact of them. Like think about the last, which might have been 15 minutes ago for all I know, the last time something major broke on the news and you went, oh, and you felt it. You were shocked by it. You started having all these emotions and these feelings and these arguments in your head about it. Jesus walking around and telling people that God was a father caused that sort of reaction in his crowds. Because in the religious world of the day, it was not common to understand God as Father. Now, Zeus and some of the others might be seen as like the patriarchal God, but it wasn't the relationship you had with a parent. It was more that prestige, that position of a sorts. When Jesus was talking to people, the religious system of the day taught that we should fear God and kind of took it to the scary clown sort of ways. Fearing God came with a very large list of rules and regulations. The Pharisees had literally 1,000 different things that you couldn't do this, you had to do this, you can't say this, but you can say this. You can't, like it was exhausting. Just look at Sabbath regulations in the Bible and then look what the Pharisees turned that into. Well, a part of that was, and I'm not going to spend too much time going into the history of translation in Scripture because it's really fascinating here, but part of that was the fear of God shaped how they named God. Specifically, what they would not say. So the holy name, which we translate as Yahweh, was kind of a confusing phrase for us, partially because it started with they took out the vowels, right? And then they started saying, well, like even that, like we don't want to degrade the name of God by running it through our lips or running it through our blood. So they started using substitutionary phrases, or they would just omit the word entirely. So how many in the room have seen the Harry Potter series? Okay, a few of you. So this will land at least. You know there's the one that shall not be named. And then Harry Potter says Voldemort. They're like, shut up! Don't say that! Right? That's the way the religious leaders were with God. They would literally at times say a sentence that would have his name there, and then they would just put an audible pause and say, may his name be praised. If you notice in your Bible, a lot of times you see the word Lord, and it's in all uppercase. That's not what was originally there. The Pharisees and the scribes took out God's name, but then they didn't want to just leave a blank space in the textual part of it. So they would substitute a word that functionally we call now Adonai. And so Adonai means Lord. So they would put Lord there instead of saying or writing Yahweh, because they didn't want to blaspheme, which is good, right? That's one of the things we're not supposed to do. We're not supposed to misuse the name of God. It's one of the 10 Commandments, right? But they took that to mean that you don't even write the letters. You don't even say, and so even saying that with your lips was considered on the verge of something capricious, malicious, heresy even. Now talk about the ministry of Jesus. Jesus comes in and says you can refer to God as Father. But again, the English language or translation of language sometimes lets us down. We don't see the fullness of it. When Jesus says this, oftentimes the word he uses there is Abba. The word Abba, we have a young family with a young little baby in there. Pretty soon, they're going to be starting to make these gibberish words up. And at some point, they're going to pick a word like mama or dada or something like that, and your heart is just absolutely going to melt. You'll be like, ha ha, it was me, not you, sucker. Like, I got you, right? But the word Abba is what an Aramaic child would say because they couldn't form the full word for father. Think about the levels of that. The Pharisees say you can't even say God's name. They at least substitute Adonai. They leave a blank. Okay, we can at least maybe say father, but that's stretching it. Then someone walks around and says dad, and they're like, whoa, okay, you're getting a little loose with the way you're referring to God here, guys. Daddy, okay, we're going to have a talk. But when was the last time, like if my son, who's a giant, you see him on Sundays, 6'3" now, if he walked in here and went, Dad, can I talk to you? You guys would be like, what did that adult human-sized person just say? Dada? And Jesus literally said, you can refer to your heavenly Abba. That would be like someone walking around and saying, Dada. That's what they would hear, except for they would hear it through the lens of a religious system that says if you blaspheme God's name, you must be punished, you must be hurt, something has to be done about this person. Whenever we think about Jesus, and we're going to get to him in a couple weeks, don't get me wrong on this, but whenever we think about Jesus, we oftentimes think about this like heavenly Mr. Rogers who just walked around and told people to love each other. Maybe he's the dude abides, all that. Like he's just this calm, chill dude. He's not going to... And yet you're constantly seeing how people wanted to take him out and kill him. This is one of those things. This is one of those things that they literally wanted to take Jesus out for, because he is saying that we can have this relationship with God that not only is not so formal that you don't even speak the name of Father, how dare I speak your name? I'm so sorry, right? But But you can literally, like a toddler who barely can walk, try to go up to God with like these words that barely even make sense, but there's just enough there that you know that that child is wanting this relationship, this trust, this hope. When they lift up their hands and get swooped up into the air, like if you could have an adult consciousness but when you're a baby, and then somebody like picks you up and throws you around, like you've been on a roller coaster 3 or 4 times your size, you're freaking out, right? They're just like, wee, because they trust you. That is Abba relationship. This not only flew in the face of the religious of the day, but it sounded like blasphemy, heresy. It was crazy. But obviously, it went into the teachings of Jesus' followers. So we're going to take a look at Romans chapter 8. In a previous version of this experience, one of my goals was to have everybody try to memorize over the course of the year Romans chapter 8. I don't do that anymore because it didn't work out and it was mostly my fault. So let's just own it where it was. I didn't lean into it the way I should have. But if you ever want one chapter in Scripture to just go back through over and over and over, Romans chapter 8, you will see through this entire experience. It's that powerful. So Romans chapter 8, if somebody would read, it might be a little small on screen, but it's on page 32 of your books. If you would read the orange text there from that. Go ahead.
So then, brothers and sisters, we are not obligated to the flesh to live according to the flesh, because if you live according to the flesh, you are going to die. But if, by the Spirit, you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all those led by God's Spirit are God's sons. You did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear. Instead, you received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry out, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies together with our spirit that we are God's children, and if children, also heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, so that we may be glorified with him. Romans 8:12-17.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So let's just look at that for a sec before you move on. So then, brothers and sisters. Notice the familial language. Some of you grew up in church tradition where everybody was brother Frank and sister Hazel or whatever. Like, we don't really do that much anymore. But the idea behind it was like if we share God as a father, this is where we are. We are brothers and sisters. It says we're not obligated to the flesh to live according to the flesh, because if you live according to the flesh, you're going to die. But then it keeps going into this talk about the Spirit of God, and it says why? For all those led by God's Spirit are God's sons. You did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear. So notice right here, Paul is contrasting fear as in this, like, I'm going to be enslaved, I'm going to be taken over, I'm going to be like, my willpower is going to be exhausted. It says we're not falling back into that. Instead, we are calling out in this spirit of adoption, Abba, Father. The word picture that he's wanting you to see is literally contrasting somebody who's going to jail you, who's going to take away your freedom, who's going to tell you you're going to stop that, and if you don't stop it, I'm going to make you stop that. Versus the image of a baby just learning to walk, who can't do it right. They stumble everywhere. Their little legs are still crooked. They don't know how to do it. And yet they hold up their hands and say, Abba, I trust you. This is about that relationship with God. But a relationship of fear is not the same as a relationship of trust, right? You get the difference inherently in that. And yet this is our relationship with God that we're talking about. The fear of God is more knowing that God is all powerful, all huge, and falling into him because you know his character is that of a loving father. But here's the problem, page 33. Oh, actually, let me say one more thing before we get to the problem. So Paul redefined, yeah, I know, right? Paul redefines the basis of our identity as being children of God. Notice the language he's using there. Like, identity language is, lost some of the edge it had 5-6 years ago. But for a while, like, the most important thing was, how do we identify? What is our identity based in? Where do we find our identity? For Paul, he said, we are not slaves. We are children of God. That is who we are. So in a few weeks, we're going to talk about the 4-part gospel. And one of the things we're going to talk about is this idea of the imago Dei, which is the image of God. That when God created us, he created us in his image to be like him. The word Christian means little Christ, like little person who looks like Christ. Like nowadays we have a good parallel because anybody and their brother has a 3D printer in, somewhere in their family, or their 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? And if you upload a picture of yourself and like make it a little 3D thing, like they can make you a 3D version of yourself. That image is like a little copy of you. That's what there's idea of the imago Dei is about. We were made in the image of God. We are his likeness, but we're children. We're an infant version. We're smaller. We're not exact, but we're in that likeness. The same way that when my wife and I were younger and my son was much younger, we were at IHOP and we were for some reason in like Houston, Texas, I want to say. I know we were somewhere in the South. And we're sitting there, and this woman keeps looking over at us, and I'm like, why is this girl giving me the hairy eyeball? Like, what is happening here? And she just finally speaks up. She goes, man, you didn't get any of that boy, did you? He looks just like his mother. Like, well, I would like to argue differently, but sure, I could see it. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about a family resemblance, right? That the imago Dei, the image of God, means that like when people look at you like, oh, you're one of the, whatever somebody's, well, you're one of the Smith boys, aren't you? Well, how'd you tell? You're like the spitting image of them, right? But we are the children of God. We take on his nuances. We resemble the character, the family resemblance. But, now I get to say it, there's a problem. Remember last week, for those who were here, if you watched it online to catch up, Carey Nieuwhof said, we are in the most fatherless generation in history, known history, that did not lose our fathers to war. So here's a little bit of my story real quick. I only share it, not so you can get to know me or whatever, as much as so that it opens up conversation for you. When I was a kid, my dad and my mom, they got together while she was still in high school. She was pregnant her last year of high school, and they had the baby just after that. But my father was about 2 years younger than my mom. So he's about 17. She's 19 when she has me. And back in that day, you have a kid like that, there's definitely a shotgun waiting at the door. And I don't know that my grandfather was that type of person, but I will say my mom and dad did get married pretty quickly. So, there you go. They got an apartment together, and my dad had the only parenting experience that my mom could share was my dad didn't like the weird thing that was coming out of my belly button when I was born. So he was trying to remove it. And my mom had to be like, no, like that's natural. It happens. It's going to fall out on its own. I don't want to villainize my father. I just tell exactly kind of the way I know it. But my dad, shortly thereafter, he and my mom split up. I don't know if I was 2 months old or something like that. But I know by the time I have memories formed, my dad's not in them. My earliest memories are my grandfather, my grandma, my mom, because we ended up having to move back in with my grandparents, and that was the house I mostly grew up in. But every once in a while, there would be this sighting, because he was still around town, right? So every once in a while, I'd come across him, or he'd come over, and it was like this weird, I don't know what to do with this encounter, right? You're the person who caused me to have life, and yet I have no clue who you are. And so from about the time that I can have memories to about high school, give or take, there's just these weird little snippets. Like one night I woke up and my mom and I lived in this other house that wasn't my grandparents', and it's the middle of the night and I hear something going on. I come out to the living room and my father is there, and I'm like, what in the world are you doing here? And my mom says, hey, you weren't meant to see him. Somebody's looking for him, and I just need you to know there's a gun under the pillow that he's going to be sleeping in, so don't come up and try to grab anywhere near your father's head, and don't try and startle him. Okay. He's gone by morning. That's all the information I have about this encounter, right? There was this time where Dad saw me and we were chatting, and he got really excited about this go-kart that he had built. I've shared that story in sermons before, so I won't go on too far about it. But he made the mistake of just talking it up so much. And then he said, oh yeah, I'd love to make you one someday. Well, someday to him meant like 15, 20 years. I don't know. But to a kid who's only got these small interactions with his father, someday is like tomorrow. And so I kept asking my mom for weeks and months on end, where's my go-kart? When's Dad going to give me my go-kart? And my mother, being the loving mother that she was, saw the heartbreak in me, so she went and repossessed my father's go-kart. And then I had a go-kart. My dad did not. For years, all I knew about him was that he was with different women. My mom never talked ill of him, but she would always just kind of say, you know, there's just certain things you got to be careful about. Years later, as I grew up, I came across my dad, and he was working construction on the church that I went to at the time. And again, I'd been going to this church for years, just never seen my dad, and all of a sudden he's like there, and I'm like, what are you doing here? He's like, hi, son. I'm like, hi, how do I hold my hands when I'm talking to this being, right? And my friends and I all had this not possibly untrue rumor that like I was going to end up finding this girl and we were going to really like each other, and we'd start, kissing or doing something like that, and we'd start talking about our families, and I'd be like, oh yeah, my dad is Ernest Lee Brown Sr., and she'd be like, my dad's Ernest Lee Brown Sr. What are you talking about? Like, there was just this rumor because my dad was all, with lots of different women, but he wasn't there. So my friends like to torment me. So years go by. I don't have any interaction with him. He kind of disappears out of the picture. And then I'm living in Oklahoma, and I start getting letters. I'm like, this is weird. But they're from the Tucson Federal Penitentiary. So my dad was Breaking Bad, literally, manufacturing methamphetamines, got caught, went to jail, do not pass go, do not collect $200. While he's in jail, he sobers up, or prison, he sobers up, and he starts to reflect on what he's lost in his life and what he hasn't had, and he decides that he wants to establish this relationship with his son. And so he does this crazy thing where he gives his life to Jesus in prison, and starts to feel like God is telling him that we are going to be reunited. And here I am training to be a pastor, and I'm like, yeah, right. Okay, sure. So he tells me, I don't know how, but God's going to bring us together. And I'm like, bet. And so is God. So there's a prison riot in Yuma, Arizona, and they decide the best thing they can do is to separate the prisoners. So they send my dad to a prison in Oklahoma that's 45 minutes away from where I live. Now, all through college, I had wrestled with this view of God as Father. And I had this night where I just had it out with God. Because if you ask me, even to this day, and I said it last week, so I won't repeat too much, but my view of God was that, yes, God created me, and he's my Father, right? He's out there somewhere. But he's not really interested in my life. He doesn't really pay attention too much. And he really only shows up every once in a while if I really, really need something, right? I still wrestle with that. To this day, that view of God. Because your relationship, your view of God is often disproportionately shaped by your early relationship with your father. And that was my early relationship with my father. So Dad gets out of prison, tries to find a job. One of his buddies decides that they want to go take some copper from a school, and Dad's like, all right, sure, I'll help. And woo! Dad's back in prison. So he's writing me again, right? Letters stopped. Then all of a sudden they start again. And he's like, yeah, I'm really going to do it this time. I'm like, okay, sure. So Dad can't get a job, twice convicted felon. He ends up getting a job with a shipping company, trucking company. At this point, I now live with my family in Ohio. We're trying to adopt my daughter and do some things like that. And Dad starts writing me saying, hey, weird thing, but nobody will hire me. But I think when somebody does, God's going to bring us back together. I'm like, bet. And God's like, yeah. So he gets a shipping route that takes him from Dallas, Texas to just north of Columbus, Ohio, where I live. And every week for about a year and a half, on Wednesday nights, my dad was at my house. God did a lot of heart work and a lot of hard work in my life through that. My son, for a brief period in his life, got to interact with my father, got to know Grandpa, who was always bringing him stuff, who was always there. And there was a bit of me who was like, why didn't I get that? But on the other side, I was like, thank goodness he gets that. Fast forward, my dad finds another woman, and that's his Achilles heel. She changes his heart around. He ends up getting fired from the job he's at, ends up going to work for Amazon in Tucson. And I'm sitting in my office at Sloan's Lake Church, the church that we merged together with here. And I get this Facebook message from a person who bears the name of my aunt that I've literally not interacted with in my life. And she says, hey, Ernie died. You need to contact me. And I go, hi, scammer. I don't know who you are, but this isn't something you play around with. She's like, no, Lee, like seriously, your dad died. I'm like, what? So before he died, I gave my dad a copy of this book that I'm recommending you read. And chapter 5 is all about God as Father. And I share with you all of the things that are in this. And I remember asking him, how'd you like reading the book? And he goes, I like most of it. I said, yeah? You struggle with one of the chapters? He goes, yeah, just a little bit, right? And in that moment, I got to see the impact my dad's sin and distance had on him that broke the relationship that he and I had. And right as we're starting to get this thing back together, choices are made, he's back out of the picture, and then all of a sudden, that's the end of it. But at least I got to reconcile with my dad, and at least I got to have those moments where I can look back, like the one time where I finally trusted my dad enough during those Wednesday nights in Ohio where I said, Dad, we're going to trust you to watch your grandchild, and my wife and I are going to go take a date night. So we went to the restaurant, and 15 minutes into being at the restaurant, I get a phone call. Lee. Yeah? He pooped. Okay. And then there was this long pause on the other end of the line where he just went, I've never changed a diaper before. And that spoke volumes to me. Because I'd have been the diaper he'd have changed. But he never did. But he did, and he wanted me to come home and clean the diaper and then go back. I was like, no, this is yours. You've got this. Tell us how it went later. And I asked him later, how'd it go? He goes, well, that was an experience. So there you go. So there's this great book series. There's now 4. I haven't read the 4th one, but James Bryan Smith. People ask me sometimes, like, if you could recommend, 10 books or whatever that everybody should read in their life, 3 of them are The Good and Beautiful God, The Good and Beautiful Life, and The Good and Beautiful Community by James Bryan Smith. And in one of those books, he says this: when Jesus describes God as Father, we have to let him define what fatherhood means. God as Father and Jesus as Son existed before any human father or son or daughter existed. Therefore, fatherhood is first defined by God and Jesus, not by Adam and his children. Many people, now here's where I want you to start thinking about those 3 questions. What does this mean? Second question, what does this mean for my life? many people have been deeply wounded by their biological fathers. And this makes thinking about God as Father very difficult. The solution is not to abandon the term Father, but to let Jesus define it. God is the perfect Father. When we think about what a father should be, what we're doing is thinking about the attributes of God. We are made in His image. So when fathers get it right, we're borrowing from the character of God. When we get it wrong, well, we're not. He's helping us. He's there with us. Far from being out to get us, God is watching over us. I learned a lot when I became a father. When my son started doing stupid things, I didn't go, oh, I can't wait till that kid screws up so I can mess his life up. Some of you apparently do that. Okay, great. Good to know. We're going to have an interesting small group discussion then. But when he does, when we catch him in things, like there's this one time, sorry buddy if you end up watching this, I came home randomly one day during the middle of the day, and my son was home from school, and he's on his VR headset. And I walk in, and I hear this voice that's, slowly gaining masculinity and manhood that it brings it to a deeper register, just cussing like a sailor to his friends on VR. And I walk in, and he's again, VR, so he didn't hear me. He doesn't see me. I walk downstairs where he is, and I just put my hand on his shoulder. And he goes like this and walks to his room. 2 hours later, he comes upstairs and goes, Dad, can we talk? I wasn't like there to go, how dare you, you little brat, right? I just believed in him that he could do so much better. And that's what I expressed to him. I was disappointed in his choices, sure. But I'm here for him. I'm not cutting him off because he did something stupid. In fact, I want him to draw closer to me so that I can help him understand the impact of his choices and his actions. Now, I'm by no means a perfect father. I did not have a perfect father. But we all have God as the perfect Father. So we're going to split into our life groups here in just a moment. One of the things I would encourage you is that this might be a time in your life where you need to go through a journey of being re-fathered by God. I've asked this question in this group for years. I've done it with students when I was a college, interim professor, and everybody I've talked to, there's been like 3 people who've been like, yeah, my dad was awesome. He was a great representative of Jesus to me. Everybody else who weren't those jerks has said, well, somewhere between he tried to, I hate that man with all there is inside of me. So I'm guessing that most of you today have feelings when we talk about the fatherhood of God. And this isn't a journey that's going to be solved by next week when we move on to God as the ancient mummy of Pharaoh and the person of Jesus, but maybe you need to start that journey. If that's you, I can only tell you a couple things that really helped me. One, I was reading through a book by John Eldredge called Wild at Heart. It's mostly for men. It's a little older at this point, 25 years old, which apparently makes me at least 25 years older than when I went through this myself, but it's powerful. He has a follow-up called Fathered by God. I absolutely recommend those 2 books for the men. Women, there's a book called Captivating. Not quite the same, but it's written by John Eldredge's wife, and she does express that. But I would say even if you just go through Fathered by God or Wild at Heart, like there's some great resources. And ladies, if there's something that you know of a resource that you're like, oh no, if you want to deal with your absent father wounds or your, whatever, this is what you want to check out, share it with me, share it with the others because I'd love to hear about it. But what I would say is this is a deep-seated wound that goes back to childhood. So as we start to unpack this, if there are feelings that express themselves in visible reactions or panic or tears or you shut down, know that there's something there that needs to be explored. But here's the one great thing I learned from Wild at Heart that I'll end on. He talks about God as Father, and he talks about the wounds we have. And then he talks about the fact that what most of us want is for God to come and put a Band-Aid over it and tell us everything is okay. But that's like telling someone with terminal cancer, why don't you just put some ointment on that and everything will be fine? He says, when we go through this process of being refathered by God, it's almost like God reopens the wounds in our lives because he has to. The things that are down in there have been festering so deep within us that the most loving thing that can happen, the most loving thing God can do, is to cut down into it and remove the festering and the rot. But anybody who's gone through surgery can tell you, no surgery is minor. I know a friend who says, minor surgery is when someone else has it. Major surgery is when I have it. So this will feel like major surgery. You might start wrestling with things where you're like, what the heck is going on in my life? Why am I a blubbering mess? Think about going to the doctor when they cut you open, when they dig into it. All that hurts. But it's not because the doctor is like, I've got a knife, look at what I can do. It's because they know something needs to be pulled out of there that is going to hurt you. And even when that gets removed and it gets sewn back up, there's still this wound and there's still these scars. But as a loving Father, God will take you into those wounds and he will help you heal from them. But that doesn't happen, by 12:30 tonight, give or take, when you're laying in bed going, okay, God, why are we wrestling with this right now? It could take years. But the journey better start now, because it will take years. So I'm going to turn off the video. Thank you guys for watching online. For those of you in the room, you were given 2 different cards, 2 different colors on the back of the cards. If you are in the blue group, you're going to stay in here with me. If you're in the red group, you're going to go into the next room with Bob.